Welcome to Leading Tourism's Transition, a podcast series by the digital tourism think tank. In this podcast, we aim to go underneath the skin at some of the most critical issues facing our industry, as we explore what they mean for destinations through the lens and perspective that experts can bring to the table. Unlike most of the other things we do at the Digital Tourism Think Tank, we are taking an expert view on this that doesn't come from destinations first, but actually comes from the role of consultants, experts, and the academic sector to try and understand what is some of the research and best practice that sits behind some of the most interesting examples of transformation that we're seeing today. In this first series, we have got together with Birka Valentin, someone who is very respected and widely known across the industry, who's helping us to understand a little bit the questions and perhaps some of the opportunities that exist around how we might leverage the potential of data in starting to realize the opportunity to become data-driven in how we address sustainability. In this series, together with Birka, we've selected a range of guests who are going to help to provide a wide range of perspectives that start to unpackage and uncover some of the key issues at play. In this first episode, we'll be exploring the role of data-driven destinations, and we'll be looking at processes and development and trying to understand how we actually get a different dynamic into our teams about how we approach the role of data in informing the decisions that we have to take, but also setting up the right structure, processes, and framework that are going to define our ability to take advantage of the new opportunities that sit behind a sustainable transformation of our sector. In episode 2, we'll be sitting down and exploring how to select the right data, and importantly, how we make sure that we make the right choices when it comes to data, so that we don't run after everything, but we narrow down to exactly the data that's going to help provide the answers where we have questions. And in the third episode, we will be looking at how to invest in our own capabilities. What are the skills, capabilities, and talents that we need to bring into the sector, or perhaps that we need to retain and keep? How do we nurture and develop those? So that being data-driven isn't just a buzzword, but it's actually something that we have truly invested in, that we have a strong sense of vision, a long-term view on, and we can really start to execute some of those big ideas that we often explore, but rarely have the opportunity to really see play out. Today's episode starts off with a sit-down chat with Anna Scutari, and she has brought her expertise to the table to start to share with us a wide range of perspectives on what it means to become data-driven as a destination.
Thank you for inviting me, the both of you. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm a professor for empirical research at the University of Munich, so Munich University of Applied Sciences to be precise. At the same time, I'm also working at a research institute called URAC Research. And I mention it because there I'm leading an observatory for sustainable tourism, where we exactly do what we are interested in today. So we try to measure the impacts of tourism at a regional level in a small region in Italy, and we're basically trying also to understand which kind of transformation can be generated by this data collection and by the monitoring of changes, actually.
Great. Now, Birka, before we jump into this discussion, we've got 3 excellent guests lined up, Anna being the first. Maybe give us a little sense of what we can expect over the series, and in particular, why you thought Anna would be a great person to help perhaps set the scene as this first episode.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And hi, Anna. And thanks so much, Nick, for bringing this together, actually, this podcast. I think it's a really interesting and ever-evolving and dynamic topic, right? The intersect of data and sustainability. And when we're thinking about the content of those few episodes that we wanted to bring in here, I think what was really driving the thinking was that it would be really nice to have a bit of a mix in terms of regional perspectives. So we will have Anna today, which is more of a European and especially mountain region perspective, as well as destination itself. Then we will have someone from Mexico in the next episode that will help us to understand a bit more the technical details and about really the data sources and everything. Well, today we're talking about more the processes of developing a strategy and really becoming a data-driven destination. And then in the last episode, we are having someone from Canada, so another, although still Americas, but very different type of destination, to talk about really the human resource aspect of all of that and the talent aspect and what that means and what we need and where we stand. So we thought that it's a really nice mix. And I'm happy we can start today with Anna and the experience from her destination work and all the expertise, because I know there's a lot of experience and perspective there to be shared. So
great. And absolutely, what a holistic kind of view on this really important topic we are going to be treated to over these different episodes. So starting out with yourself, Anna, tell us about how you've seen things evolve. And today, what does it mean to be a data-driven destination? It's something that we have heard this term thrown around quite a lot. And of course, we have these conversations in the context of how to apply data together with our sustainability goals and intentions. But of course, things are having to evolve and we have to see that move forward. So what does that mean for today's destinations?
Yeah, actually, what I think is that a lot of destinations have been driven by data since more than 20 years. But the point is, which kind of data? So in the first 2000s, I mean, the data they were driven by, they were basically the traditional statistics of tourism. So how many people get in, arrivals, overnights, average length of stay, occupancy rate of hotels and similar accommodation facilities. Nowadays, well, because maybe I mean I try to guess that they were driven by an objective to grow and grow more, so and attract more people. When I was a graduate student, the most important topic we were talking about was basically attractivity and how to increase the brand of the image and the brand of the destination. Nowadays, we don't talk that much anymore about how to attract people. We talk about how to manage those flows and how to keep a balance between local inhabitants, tourists, the use of resources, and the cost of resources, of course, over the last few months, I would say, more than ever. That's why, even if similarly to the past, we're still data driven, we are driven by different kind of data. And this data, they're not collected on a standardized way. And that's the main weak point, in my opinion, because official statistics are not able to provide destinations or standard official statistics are not able to provide destinations with this kind of evidence. That's why basically destinations keep using the old type of data, but they would need other kind of data. And for instance, they would need to know the CO2 emissions per capita of tourists. They would need to know which kind of target groups they had to address if they only knew which of them is consuming in a more efficient manner. And this data pool is basically not available on a standard level. That's why we're still at the beginning of this path. We are not able to provide standards worldwide, but we're still collecting wonderful experiences on the way, and we're trying to respond to the very punctual and specific needs to of the different stakeholders, which makes the thing a little bit, maybe a little bit less efficient, a little bit more experimental, but still I think it's necessary because we haven't developed yet the standards we would need yet.
So that's really helps us kind of get that context of where data is not perhaps something new for destinations, but something that is today presenting quite a lot of new challenges for them to also define how they organize and work with data, where they identify it, and how they incorporate that. As you said, some experimental approaches are required to sort of try to understand that better. Birka, you've worked with so many destinations, and data sharing has been central to that work that you've done with destinations. What have you seen when you kind of take that snapshot of a wide range of destinations collaborating and setting out clear intent to work with data? What does the reality look like?
Yeah, I think there has been tremendous change in the last 10, 15 years obviously from the time I've been in the area and in this specific space really between sustainability and data. That is very visible. We've seen increasing awareness. We've seen increasing knowledge about this topic. It has entirely changed in terms of that we see more and more those kind of soft indicators for on conferences, on policy papers and policies themselves, and discussions that the topic of monitoring is now not something that comes up as a surprise. It's definitely there and it always comes up. I think COVID helped certainly to kind of raise even higher the awareness of the importance of data and having better evidence to take more responsible decisions. So that change itself, I think, is very clear. It is clear, and I can just support what Anna was saying. Obviously, we are very used to focusing on the traditional kind of perspective of growth, of marketing, and that I think is probably shouldn't be out of our system, but it's still in many destinations one of the main driving factors that's just how it is. Because it is difficult to argue as well why resources should go in certain activities for data monitoring where you don't really have a direct business case, right? So that's still a big challenge in many cases. So when you look around, I guess, the world and many destinations, we also like to, I think from our past, like to have very, how can I say, a common kind of explanation and pattern for us when we look at destinations, but they're so different in their context and their needs and their basis and their foundation of what they have and what kind of information they have, that it's almost obviously impossible to be able to get to a level where all of the destinations are on at this kind of same level of development, at the same level of what kind of insights do they have. I don't think that needs to be, but this heterogeneity, what we see right now, I think, we'll have it for many more years to come. And some are much more or further down the road, let's say, in terms of being able to try out more data sources, to add more to the traditional ones, to build their own systems, to keep continuity in their approaches and not just ad hoc projects, for example, and some don't, right? It's also, there's a political level that plays into this in terms of what support is there and for how long. So there's just a lot of variety in terms of where destinations stand. But what is certain is that we are talking about a topic that all of the destinations know by now. And that has really changed from many years ago.
So tourism data has in fact been very standardized for many years. When we talk about tourism statistics, we talk about the same numbers across all destinations. And of course, that has also come under a lot of criticism. So when we talk about tourism statistics, we also criticize that we measure our KPIs by bed nights and growth. And today, when we think about some of the issues that we see stemming out of tourism, in fact, those numbers are not always helpful. But Anna, you mentioned, things like the emissions targets that we set as an industry now requiring new sets of data. And here, perhaps globally, there is actually standardization, and there are ISOs which help us to create the right governance models. When we look across the tourism industry and a wide range of destinations that exist, it seems there's very little standardization or interoperability of data. What do you see as the models today that are starting to be built, and how destinations are approaching this, and whether we perhaps are moving towards some sense of consistency, or in fact, is that something we're far from?
Well, actually, I I believe that that's something we're far away from. There are some destinations that are kind of pioneers, and they're working out their own methodology. For instance, I know about Visit Norway having a very precise estimation of CO2 emissions related to tourism and the transport sector. There is good work also in the Netherlands. We have tried to start an estimation, but I think there's a double problem in this, because you have, on the one hand, I mean, the calculation of the CO2 emissions. Okay, that's quite complex. Direct, indirect. What do you calculate, and so on. And the other hand is how to, and the other side of the coin is how to break it down to tourism. I mean, we all know how to calculate. I don't know, the added value. Okay, in general, that's a well-known formula. But when it comes to calculate the added value by tourism or for tourism, then the first difficulties start, because everybody is interpreting the indirect economic effects and the induced effects in different way. Depends on the region, as Birka said, depends on the kind of activity, depends, of course, on the participation of locals. And that's the same for the CO2 emissions. I mean, if we consider a mountain region like ours, we do have the possibility to estimate, to calculate CO2 emissions of hotels. Maybe that will be a very or quite standardized way of doing it. We might collect quite precise data about the car fleet and how many or how much CO2 emissions are related to car transport and so on. But then when it comes to activities, for instance, skiing, which is I mean, one of the main activities in the winter in our region, well, we start having difficulties in understanding how much of these emissions or how much of this um, impact is produced by locals that are going to ski over the weekend, and how much is related to tourists. The same goes for museums and other facilities. So I think there's a lot of goodwill, but we're not reaching the standards yet. And the interesting fact I'm observing, actually, is that the tourism sector is trying to do its own tiny calculation, and that's a good exercise. And on the other hand, sometimes at regional or national level, they are trying to make a top-down calculation, which is good because, for instance, in our region, we try to estimate the CO2 emissions of transport, and we got to a number, but we couldn't really be extremely sure that it was very precise. And we were very happy when we noticed that there was another calculation, um, including global, the entire emissions of all sectors in our region. And then they broke it down and tried to estimate the one of tourism, and we were getting to similar figures. That's why I think it's so important to have this kind of triangulation of results at this moment. So we don't need to have standards yet. We need to have people with goodwill and good knowledge of data management, and maybe many methods that we should try to triangulate before we decide which is the best one.
So that's a really great kind of point there, that it's perhaps just too early to be able to do that, but we need to be able to put everything out on the table. I love that term, triangulate, because I think it's really kind of speaks to that need to examine, compare, challenge, and really try to narrow down to accurate accurate sets of data that we can rely on, and that we don't overlap, we don't overestimate, we don't try to perhaps falsify results that might lead to a more positive outcome, and that we are really doing this with the best intent to get an accurate measurement of the impacts that we have as an industry, and how that sits alongside all of the other activities. When you talk about local skiing, there's even this gray question about, is this tourism? Where does tourism start and stop? what is the difference between, say, tourism economy and the visitor economy. And so there's a lot of gray that sits in between this. And I guess as an industry, we need to work that out in order to be able to get some sense of accuracy. Birka, you've seen a lot of these kind of thinking processes going on. How do you see those development stages in the destinations that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think the very interesting thing here is just on that example what Anna mentioned with the emissions, how complicated that is just for one or two indicators, right? And then we're talking about a list of indicators for destinations. I mean, even when we look at the certification lists, for example, there are sometimes 30 or more indicators that destinations need to generate information for. So that itself, then when we talk about building a data model for all of the insights, a holistic one for the destination, I think that's a really, really good example how complex that can get. And why, and it gives the answer a bit as well, why we are not as further advanced than we are at this moment of time, because it is so complex. And I do think we have to remember many times the realities, and you see that in destinations over and over again, that sometimes, obviously, and that's just how it is, there are those advances that are needed for certain indicators, and successes being made, and then maybe there is a shift in leadership or shift in support, and then there are a few years where there's almost no advancement coming in, and where maybe then, if another momentum is being created over time, it is really difficult to know what happened then before. So this I come back, I guess, to this continuity again, to building a whole kind of data infrastructure and data model for a destination and an indicator set, advancing that to that extent that we feel very comfortable in all of those levels. It's enormous, complex task to do. And so what we see in destinations is that in certain areas there's advancement, in certain there's not so much, and it is also the reason why I guess the third-party providers of data are so attractive, obviously, as well for destinations, because if there's data that can be bought and where the answers are coming without the destination having to go through the process of what the methodology is, and how to build it, because that's also kind of a development process in terms of not only getting into the nitty-gritty of the technical methodology, but also in terms of what is our position on certain things and where do we take decisions in what direction, right? And that's quite a complex task in itself as well. So that's why I think for certain indicators where we have information that is relatively easily available through third-party sources or external partners, it's very understandable that those are so attractive as they are today, and that if there's a possibility to avoid this entire process of developing methodologies, certain destinations have to, because they also don't have resources, avoid that process.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a few things there. Resources. You also talked about the need to, really identify the right data and be able to work with that. And Anna, you spoke especially about the capabilities and the knowledge needed to do that. If we think about just the technology aspects, we need to be able to build the right technology architecture to be able to record and then later benchmark and then analyze that very foundational data that we need to begin with. But if we also think about the realities in juxtaposition of that, we have an industry that's made up of hundreds, well, thousands of SMEs. Most don't have time to do even the most basic things they need for their business, such as the day-to-day marketing. So this is already a challenge. So recording and finding those data points within their business and then recording and reporting on those, which is of course essential for the whole industry to get a clearer picture, seems a huge challenge. On the other hand, when you talk about resources, clearly resources are stretched. We have many DMOs, some better funded than others. So how do we kind of, do we need to work closer together? Do we need to really align much better? What about things like open data, for example, where perhaps there's an opportunity to also create standards? So that a governance model can be created through data, that everybody at their own pace and time can come on board with some sense of standardization. So a few questions there, but I would be very curious to hear what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah, the open data one got me right away, Anna. I know you have experience with that one as well. Maybe you want to share your experience with the open data front first.
What I think is that the discussion around open data goes along since a couple of years now, but still, I would argue it's nice to have. And I totally agree that we need to improve this accessibility of data and this standards of creating databases, sharing them. I mean, all the discussion around fair data from the European Union is also a very important one nowadays. You're supposed, as a researcher, not to just publish your results, but also to publish your data sets, which is wonderful in the end, because I think you enable other people to work with your data, and I think it's the way knowledge should be built. I mean, that's a good trend, and I totally support it. On the other hand, I mean, I think we have still in our observatory, which is a very small one, with just 30 indicators, as Birka said, and a couple of people working on it. I still believe that we generate those indicators every year, and with a time series of 10 years. So, not a huge amount of data. But when we present that to stakeholders, they're overwhelmed by this data overload. And that's why, I mean, open data is good for scientists and for the specialists that would like to cope with or to further develop data analysis. But I think those institutions, those research institutions, universities, or even research centers that would like to address policymakers, well, they of course can rely on open data, but they should really pack the data in a way that they're able to generate narratives through the data. And I mean, we've discussed a lot, and it's not so easy to decide where to cut the limit or to cut the line between science and policy. And that's exactly the difficult thing, I think, because if you provide stakeholders with 30 indicators and kind of a trend of 10 years without giving them any key message, and by explaining them how you were calculating them, of course, it's okay to have metadata to explain how the procedure is and so on. They will be there. Maybe they will follow you for the first half an hour, and then maybe you will lose them completely. So the thing is how to pack your own, how to produce narratives from your own data in order to also be able to initiate a transformation. I think this is as much important as the discussion around open data. So should be transparent. It's also good exercise for us as researchers, as academics, to publish our data sets, because then you really have to accomplish with all standards. They don't have to be understandable just for you, they need to be understandable for everybody, which is a good objective, because then I have to be very, very, very clear in the structure of my data. But on the other hand, only a few people, and it won't be the majority, those people that will access and will use those raw data. So I have to also take the responsibility, and it's also an ethical responsibility, I think, to produce a result that is understandable for the majority of the citizens of a region. And we tried it out with creating a video of our report. We have a huge report with 120 pages. And every time we prepare it, we say, well, next year it will be shorter. But then every time we deal with those 30 indicators, we start creating graphs and so on. And of course, diagrams take place, text takes place, you need to explain the methodology and blah, blah, blah. And then you have this 120 pages. And then we tried to make a video, 1.5 minutes. And it was such a wonderful exercise for us. So I think we should work on both sides.
So communication and narrative being absolutely key to make that, to translate that for the audience, that you need to be listening, that you need to be acting, and to be able to break that down in a way that it's accessible for that audience. But on the complete,
Yeah, of course, not because they don't, sorry to interrupt, not because they're not at that level, but it's boring to talk hours and hours about indicators. So we need to make it really interesting, and just sharing the database is, I think, not enough to attract those stakeholders that then should act. So I don't want to judge the level of comprehension. It's not a matter of understanding. They do understand, but it's extremely boring if you're not able to express it in a way that it fosters
I
change.
think that's
Sorry to
I'm so glad you made that kind of precision there, because it's absolutely about engaging, inspiring, and encouraging people to get excited about it. So the other side of that is the opening that up and being transparent, and the responsibility that goes with that, which I think is really something that we can actually really try to aim for much more across all of the work we do. Birka, what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, on that side, I can only strengthen what just Anna said. I think it's a important educational piece for both sides. I think within the destinations as well, just that stakeholders also get used to going back to data and see it and use it, and that is something we're not used to from the past, right? So that's also kind of a transformation process that we need to foster and support within the destinations. On that is the one side, right? Leading by example, making as much publicly or transparently available, and being able to tell that story in an attractive way. That is that really important piece towards then all the stakeholders once this is done. On the other side, on the open data side, just one thought on that one as well, because in several destinations that I've worked with, there's also, of course, always the big hope that already existing open data within the destination, for example, from the Ministry of Environment or from some other governmental source, or even another open source, right, not non-governmental. There's data available that can be used relatively easy. In most of the cases, just from experience, that depending on the destination, of course, but in many cases, that's not always as easy as initially thought. So in many of the destinations where I've been engaged in, there was always this process in the beginning of looking at, okay, what's available internally, obviously, but then externally, what are some of those open data sources that we could use for some of our insights that we need, and what quality do they have? And there, many times, is the realization that the quality is not either good enough because it's not provided in a continuous manner, or the format is not in a way that can be used, or there's no access to the actual platform and its own old platform. So there's a really important piece as well in terms of working or building good relationships with those types of entities that have that, so that kind of open data landscape that is available may be improved in the future. It's a bit of a long shot many times, because you never know if they're actually moving right towards the same goals, and if there is a priority on that side. But I think it's a very important point that I've seen in destinations where if we want to improve really overall the availability of data, then relationships with those entities are really important, at least to talk about it and to make the case why tourism is reliant on that type of information, why it's important for the sector, right?
So we need to be able to map out the public, the private, the user data, and also be able to evaluate the quality, the accessibility of that data, and really make that assessment about what role it can play in our longer term approach to building the infrastructure that we also hope to be able to rely on. So perhaps closing off today's discussion, a really open question, really, which is to both of you, what are the biggest challenges that you have witnessed amongst destinations that are perhaps holding them back from being able to go further in becoming more data driven and setting up the right model and the right infrastructure that can sit behind this quite transformative process that we're seeing in tourism right now?
Yeah, I can go with two thoughts first. One I think that I've seen in almost all of the destinations is the overwhelming feeling in the beginning of this huge mountain to climb. Those many different insights to be looked at potentially, the many different approaches to be taken, the kind of homework that needs to be done, like the kind of mapping out of data that is there, the strategic decision of what should we tackle first? What are the low hanging fruits? What are the not so low hanging fruit, but of strategic importance? How to allocate resources? Who to get as a partner? Where to find the technical knowledge? All of that. This just very overwhelming starting point. I think is always one of the first things that come up. Besides the technical part as well, in deciding in terms of, okay, do we want to build this internally? Do we want to build this with a partner externally? Do we just kind of want to buy in data? How do we ensure continuity? And should we build technical knowledge and analytical knowledge internally as well? And if so, how to do that? I think those are two of the things that I've seen over and over again. And there is a lot of pros and cons for all of those sides, right? So that requires quite a process in that sense.
Yeah, and Anna, how about from the work that you've been doing? What do you see as the biggest challenges?
Well, I would say the big challenge for us at the moment is to to be able to ensure, as Birka said, to ensure continuity, to ensure this long-term monitoring, and at the same time, again, not to get in the routine of having every year the same indicator with another figure on the next year. And I don't want to say get bored in that activity, but maybe have the risk not to be able to quickly react on possible new patterns of transformation that are different from the indicators that we monitor since I don't know, 1976. So I'm struggling a bit in the observatory we are leading, because on the one hand we would like to keep this database, and we would like, or we see the value of a regular long term and monitoring and regular monitoring. On the other hand, we have the feeling that it won't be useful for policymakers unless it's very close to the everyday problems of the industry. And of course, if we just choose indicators that are close to the everyday problems of the industry, then we would lose this long term perspective. So I think there should be a compromise in between. And we should accept, as the very first book that was published on monitoring and tourism, it was a book by Graham Miller and a colleague of him. As this book said, I mean, indicators should be not cut in stone, and we should be flexible enough to keep those indicators that still tell us a story, tell us how things are going. But on the other hand, we should be brave enough to dedicate our energies to new challenges of the industry. Otherwise, there is a kind of mismatch between monitoring and urgency of the policy decisions, and then the credibility of the monitoring activity kind of decreases. And it's quite difficult, this interface between data production and data consumption is quite challenging for us at the moment.
I think those are very thoughtful words to end on. They leave us with quite a lot to consider. And that sense of finding compromise and balance is a really key message, I think, that sometimes we perhaps, yeah, don't really accept or don't really consider. But I think you said it beautifully. It leaves us with something to think about. And just want to say a huge thanks to both yourself, Anna, and Birka for this first episode, which I really think helps set the scene when we talk about data-driven transformation. What are some of the big challenges that actually perhaps get in the way of that ideal that we kind of look towards, but perhaps need us to consider the real kind of detailed challenges which find their way into that vision, and some really great thoughts there to set it out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Leading Tourism's Transition. I know that it certainly has been very interesting from where I'm standing. Anna Scutari gave us a really excellent analysis of how destinations can seize those opportunities by being more data-driven. And of course, thank you to Birka for this excellent navigation of some of these complex issues, where, as always, she's able to provide a huge amount of perspective. So, if you are looking at where you can get the next episode, don't worry. Subscribe to the series and make sure you get this wherever you get your podcasts. And next week, we will be joined by Arturo Constantini from Brain Analytics, who's going to help us unpackage the idea around what it means to build the right data within your processes. The question we will be asking is, how do we select the right data and the right content that helps us to move to the next level? So we don't just make a commitment to being data-driven, but we start to organize everything that exists in that data lake. We hope to see you then. Have a great week.